Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to episode 10 of the Beware the Day podcast. My name is Ryan. Today is Friday, March 22nd, 2024. Thank you so much for joining me today. As always, I want to thank Black El Paso Voice for giving me this platform. I encourage you to subscribe and follow this podcast on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Apple, iHeart, or Spotify. And if you wish to donate to the podcast, please follow the links that are on your screen. As always, one of the central themes of this podcast is creating and preserving generational wealth. If you visit my Facebook page, KRC Companies LLC, you'll find ideas on promoting generational wealth and boosting profitability and cash flow for business owners. So if that's something that interests you, please visit my Facebook page, KRC Companies LLC. Today, we're going to focus on the struggle for equality. We're going to talk about equality in employment. But before we dive into that topic, since this is Women's History Month, I have chosen to put a historical figure in the Black History Spotlight every week. Last week, we talked about Fannie Lou Hamer. This week, we're going to talk about Diane Nash. Diane Nash was a prominent civil rights figure that you may or may not be familiar with. Her work, as I stated, everybody knows about Martin Luther King, Reverend Abernathy, Andrew Young, but there are a lot of women that were prominent in the civil rights struggle that you may or may not be familiar with. Diane Nash was born in Chicago in 1938 to Leon Nash and Dorothy Bolton Nash. Her grandmother, Carrie Bolton, took care of her while her mother worked. Ms. Bolton continued to be an important influence on Nash's life and was committed to making sure Diane understood her value. Now, Nash's parents divorced after World War II, and her mom married again to John Baker, who was a waiter on the railroad dining cars owned by the company. And Mr. Baker was a member of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, one of the most powerful Black unions in the nation. Nash attended Catholic schools and at one time thought about becoming a nun. She attended Howard University for 1 year and transferred to Fisk University in Nashville. While she was in Nashville, she was first exposed to the full force of Jim and customs and their effect on the lives of Blacks. Nash recounted her experience at the Tennessee State when she had to use the colored women restroom, signifying the first time she had ever seen and been impacted by segregation signage. Outraged by the realities of segregation, Nash began to show signs of leadership and soon became a full-time activist. Nash's parents and grandmother were shocked when she got involved in the civil rights movement. Her mother soon became a supporter and assisted with fundraising for the Freedom Riders. Nash attended workshops led by James Lawson. While in India, James Lawson had studied Mahatma Gandhi's techniques of nonviolent direct action and patterns used in his political movement. At the end of her first semester at Fisk, Nash had become one of Lawson's most devoted disciples. Although originally a reluctant participant in nonviolence, Nash emerged as a leader due to her well-spoken, composed manner when speaking to the authorities and to the press. In 1960, at age 22, she became the leader of the Nashville sit-ins, which lasted from February to May. Lawson's workshops included simulations in order to prepare the students to manage verbal and physical harassment that they would face during the sit-ins. In preparation, the students would go out to segregated stores and restaurants, doing nothing more than speaking with the manager when they were refused service. Lawson graded their interactions in each and sit-in, reminding them to have love and compassion for their harassers. When Nash asked Nashville's mayor, Ben West, on the steps of City Hall, quote, "Do you feel it is wrong to discriminate against a person solely on the basis of their race or color?" The mayor admitted that he did. 3 weeks later, the lunch counters of Nashville were serving African Americans. Nash participated in numerous protests, in addition to sit-ins, often being arrested and refused bail. Saying jail, no bail, protesters refused to post bail and demanded jail time rather than paying fines as a statement that, quote, paying bail or fines indicates acceptance of an immoral system and validates their own arrests. As a practical strategy, financial resources were limited. Nash recruited volunteer Freedom Riders. Freedom Riders were civil rights activists who rode interstate buses into the segregated United States in 1961 and subsequent years to challenge the non-enforcement of the United States Supreme Court decision of 1946 and Boynton v. of 1960, which ruled segregated public buses were unconstitutional. She convinced other civil rights leaders to continue the freedom rides in spite of increasing mob violence. Nash worked with the Christian Leadership Conference to organize the Selma to Montgomery marches, a series of protests for voting rights in Alabama in early 1965. In 1965, the SCLC gave its highest award, the Rosa Parks Award, to Nash and James Bevel for their leadership in initiating and organizing the Alabama Project and the Selma voting rights movement. In addition, she has received the Distinguished American Award from the John F. Kennedy Library Foundation, the LBJ Award for Leadership and Civil Rights from the Lyndon Baines Johnson Library and Museum. Decades after she played a critical role in the civil rights movement, Nash remains committed to the principles of nonviolence that her throughout her life. Although she was a key architect in many of the movement's most successful efforts, she remains humble upon reflection. Quote, many thousands of people to make the changes that we made, people whose names we'll never know. They'll never get credit for the sacrifices they've made, but I remember. In July of 2022, President Joe Biden presented Nash with the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Ladies and gentlemen, Diane Nash. And just to quickly recap what we covered last week, we talked about the life of Fannie Lou Hamer. So in that, please pull up last week's podcast, which is archived on all of my platforms. This lesson, we're going to talk about the struggle for equality in the employment arena. Now, this will be broken up over a series of podcasts. So we're gonna talk about part one here, and then next week we'll dive into part two. The civil rights and Black power movements of the 1960s and 70s resulted in federal policies that allowed African Americans to obtain better paying jobs, but without considerable struggle and frequent reversals. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission was created to eliminate discrimination in the workplace, promote equal employment programs, and oversee compliance with federal law. Executive Order 11246 of 1965 required all employers with federal contracts of more than $50,000 to file with the government written plans for eliminating discriminatory staffing practices. 1972 Equal Employment Opportunity Act amendment, federal government directly, mandating affirmative action, hiring, and employment policies by all federal executive departments and agencies. As a result of the flurry of legislation, federal, state, and local government agencies hired more African Americans and paid them more than private employers did. So next week, we will dive into part two of the struggle for equality as it relates to employment. In closing, I want to thank Black El Paso Voice for this podcast and for this platform. Be sure to tune into Suite 915 with Curtis and Fedora and Real Talk with Marcus McCoy. And please support the podcast by visiting the links that are on your screen. This is Ryan. I want to thank you once again for tuning in today. And remember, Black History Month is from January 1st through December 31st. Take care, and we'll see you next time.